Hi, I'm Patricia Allingham Carlson, and this is my painting demonstration of Lake Galena Sunset, Peace Valley. It's based on a wonderful photograph by Susan Supper, who was kind enough to give me permission to use it. Sky to water, water to trees. I hope you like this, and you'll give it a thumbs up. Now let's paint. This is a painting I'm doing from a scene at a local park. The park is called Peace Valley. I started in with a wet sky and immediately began to drip in colors. I put the colors in as bright as I could get them. While it was wet, I drew a damp brush across the top and removed some color to look like rays of the sun. And I'm proceeding to build up more color. This is a sunset over Lake Galina at Peace Valley. Photo permission granted by photographer Susan Supper, who took this absolutely gorgeous photograph. I'm building up dark clouds primarily using indigo and purple mixed together. As you can see, I've used cadmium yellow, permanent rose, and some cadmium orange. I'm building up clouds on top of the glorious sunset colors, painting them in dry at this point, and then softening them with water, so I have soft edges on the clouds. The color of the sky goes right down into the water, and the horizon line will soon be established for the lake. There's also a far shore and a closer shore with trees growing from both of these shores. So I'm setting up the horizon lines using a mixture of purple lake and indigo. The waves were not coming in parallel to the sky, but at a slight angle. So I'm establishing the angular direction of the waves coming in. And that's what I was doing with my ruler. Not with pencil, but with paint. Have been taught that a horizon should be slightly above the middle of the paper or slightly below the middle of the paper, but that you should not divide your paper totally in half if you can help it, because offset division makes for more interest to the eye. So I am working slightly above the horizon at this point. When the damp brush going over the already painted sky was able to remove the white areas that you see in the sky to simulate the sun rays, I was really excited because that was just what I wanted it to look like. So at that point, I had a sky that I was really excited and happy with. That made proceeding with the rest of the painting even more important to do it right. Because skies don't always work quite so well and easily for me. Now there's a big island full of trees on the far right side, so very little light was getting past them. And that's why I'm blocking in darker color areas on the right. Because you won't see the reflection of the sunset in that area. Many small ripples and waves were going across this body of water. I'm marking out the central ones, so I'll see where to paint them in. As the waves come closer to the surface or the edge of the paper and closer to the viewer, they become further apart and they become larger. I'm giving myself the markers as to where to paint the different water action that I see. Just marking them in. So in this case, I am actually doing the far background first, then I'm working into the foreground second, and the last thing I'll be working with will be more in the middle ground area with the distant trees. Deepening the horizon line and distant shoreline for drama. It's got at least 2 layers on it, maybe 3 at this point. And these are glazed layers so that they've dried in between layers. Glazing meaning to build up layer upon layer, allowing time for each one to dry completely. In the foreground, the color is quite deep. So I've mixed together some indigo, some Payne's gray, and some purple lake. I'm putting this paint on fairly thickly at this point, and I'm being careful to paint around areas that I want left light. Here is a big wave right up in the front. And hopefully that wave and the directionality lines that I'm painting in will draw the viewer into the scene and the composition. These dark colors also took quite a few layers of paint to get them dark enough. In the photograph they appeared almost black, but after my own ponderings and consideration, I decided not to use black and to continue to build up colors with indigo, Payne's gray, and purples. At this point I am working dry on dry, putting the colors in, adding colors on top of the wet colors, and then allowing them to dry again. I will be softening edges at a future point. And now the waves are getting established, and yet I'm preserving the reflections of the light. You can see that my strokes as I go backward into space are becoming much smaller and closer together and finer. And that's for the sake of painting the perspective in the water. After it's all established, you could see me going back and putting more layers of darks where I wanted to have the drama and making it even darker. Working into the middle ground of the water some more and trying to keep the central area beneath the brightest part of the sky a little more undetailed. Enhancing my darks stroke by stroke and trying to make sure I get the right direction for each stroke. What I'm doing at this point is both building up reflection colors and softening the edges of the reflections against the dark waters. You could see I'm adding some roses, some mauves, some oranges, and I'll be adding more bright yellows as well. I'm painting in the paint, softening around the edges as I do so. So I'm adding paint, softening edges, and then doing a little blotting to blur the edges even more. Here comes some brighter yellows and some oranges. And then softening around them. There's no right or wrong way to do this. You have to experiment and see what works for you. So I was trying several different ways to approach this. And going back and darkening things the entire time as well by adding more layers of paint, very dark paint, in the troughs of the waves where the least light would reach. I'm trying to consider the colors in the sky above the areas I'm painting in the brights, so that they will be reflected accurately. It's quite a challenge for me to paint waves, and a very exciting one to do, because I want it to look realistic here. And yet I don't want to paint out all the bright colors that are reflected in it. So when I take a break, I get back from it and see if there's unnatural looking areas, which I then break up. And adding more darks. Each time I add a glaze of dark, then I have to go back and soften any edges that don't look right against the lighter reflections. When I want to paint a finer line as I move backwards, I use more of the tip of my brush. If you pull your brush up high and just use the tip, you can get a very thin line. Pushing harder on the brush, of course, flattens the brush and gives you a broader line and a larger area to fill in. Moving on, I begin to develop the shoreline. First, I'm putting in some distant trees that are sort of undefined, just spiky and suggested. And I'm filling them in a deep silhouette with not much detail at this point. Some central trees were growing much closer along the shoreline, and that's what I'm now painting in the trunks for, to mark out where they're going to be. The woods actually was quite dense at that point, so many trees will come up into this area, and I'm trying to preserve some dominant ones. I am looking at the photograph for references for these trees, and any tree that looks like a good form and shape, I am using it as closely copied as I can. But I'm also feeling free to change the trees if they aren't working for my composition, or they look odd, or they're too regular, because I want to space the trees in an irregular manner so that they will look natural and staggered. Not all in a nice neat row, because nature doesn't plant things in a nice neat row. People do that, and this was a natural forest here along the edge. Where the branches get very fine and together, I use more of the side of my brush with some dry brush. Because painting each teeny weeny little branch wouldn't be very natural looking either when I get to the edges of the trees and the branches are very fine. But you could see the trees are starting to build up now at this point and feel a little more natural. Here's a point to bring up. Being a left-handed artist, I keep my brushes and my palettes on my left side. If you're right-handed, which most of you probably are, you would probably have the opposite setup and have your palettes on the right-hand side to be easier to reach. When I'm working with a lot of the same color, that's when you see me put a puddle on my tape so I can dip right into that and not have to go all the way across the paper to get more. So developing the waves took a lot of time. Now developing the trees and their branches, getting the trunks to the right thickness and the right darkness according to closeness to the edge of the shoreline or being further back, all those things took a lot of time. But again, since I like the sky so much, I really wanted to take my time and make this one look just right. And it's coming together more and more like I want. That doesn't always happen, so this was a lucky painting for me. Doing a little repair work over on the left where I drip some drops. Fortunately, there were some clouds I could add to cover up anything that looked blurry or wrong. And now I'm coming back in with my darks to add yet another layer for accent. At this point, I even asked some friends, should I just go ahead and use black to get my accents as dark as I want? Many people said do whatever works for you. But I decided to listen to the ones who said black in natural watercolor doesn't always look very natural. So I mixed yet more paint with purples, indigos, and Payne's gray. The area where the trees are reflecting into the water needed darkening for sure. I'm trying to create an interesting random design where the trees are reflecting. Painting around waves and light. Leading from the foreground down the diagonal toward the sunset. And trying to lead the eye continually into the painting. I hope you enjoyed seeing how I painted this sunset over a beautiful area lake as much as I enjoyed painting it. You'll see links below to click on to like my video. You can subscribe and ring the bell to see future videos. You can also click on links to the products I use below. And you can find my Facebook art page, my blog there also. I'd love to have your comments, and I'll see you next video.